One of the big challenges that a spiritual seeker faces is in the attempt to keep up surrender or self-inquiry at all times, there is going to be what is called resistance. Resistance is actually a term that comes from psychoanalysis, where Freud talked about the fact that patients both wanted to get better but also didn't want to get better. And the part that didn't want to get better for a variety of reasons, including the fact that they, you know, liked the way that things were, they knew the way things were, they gained certain benefits out of the current situation, even though it might be causing them a lot of suffering. Nevertheless, there were also certain benefits, and that, by giving up the current way of being, you definitely lose those benefits, and you kind of go to this uncertain future, which you haven't experienced yet. So, there's a certain part of you that doesn't want to do it. The same is true with enlightenment and the spiritual search. There is a part of the seeker that wants to find clearly, that wants to gain peace and existential truth and all of that good stuff. There's another part which wants to keep its current identity, wants to keep the illusion of control, it wants to keep the sense of being an individual person, because that's familiar. And also, the illusion of being a person is such that, if you are a person, then you have certain desires and fears. And when you attempt surrender or inquiry during daily life, well, that's going to interfere with those desires and fears. At least so it seems from the perspective of being a person. So if that person-based perspective is true, then doing surrender or self-inquiry will interfere with getting what you want and avoiding what you don't want. And that's a persistent source of resistance. Now, the reality is surrender or self-inquiry do not, in fact, interfere with those things. They simply appear to, and that appearance is an illusion. But the sense that they are interfering with the process of obtaining desires and avoiding fears is going to be a source of resistance. Now, resistance can manifest in many different ways. It can manifest quite consciously and in your awareness as, I just don't feel like doing surrender or self-inquiry in this situation. It can also manifest more subtly or even unconsciously, as in, for example, simply forgetting to do it at various times. Forgetting is not an accidental or random action. It's the result of unconscious forces in your mind that are coming together to decide, nope, I don't want to do this. So how do you, as a seeker, deal with resistance? So the best way to think about it is, can we bring that resistance more out into the open and see it, and then maybe perhaps attempt to address its concerns in some way, to assuage its fears, to ask questions of a teacher, or to read more, right? Or simply just to talk and hear and empathize with those parts of yourself that may feel fearful or resistant to change. Because the reality is, unfortunately, you cannot really steamroll resistance. Resistance is a kind of suggestion to look into some part of yourself. Now, how do you do that? Well, one of the ways is to try to identify those situations in which you think that resistance might be going on, in which, for example, you are finding it difficult to keep up surrender or self-inquiry, and see if you can find patterns or themes in those situations. And start to ask yourself, what are you feeling and thinking in those situations? And maybe try to monitor yourself. What are you looking at? What's going on in your body and in your feelings? If you can pay attention, maybe you can catch something of what's going on. and then try to put that into words. Try to express what that feels like. The more explicitly and clearly we can express our emotions, and often it helps to do what I've called in the past metaphorization, literally using metaphors to describe our emotions, right? And that can be something as simple as saying, it felt like I was just pricking my fingers on thorns, It could be something as simple as that. It could be something like, drawing a picture or writing a short story or something like that. It could be a more elaborate way of expressing what's going on. But the more we can sort of feel and express the emotions that are connected with the resistance, that is the fears and desires and uncertainties, the more, first of all, we're going to feel heard, or those parts of ourselves that are resistant are going to feel heard, and simply being heard and being understood and being empathized with is itself often a way of softening those resistances. And also, they might be pointing to something that that you can address, some doubt, that you can actually get more knowledge about or think about, and really try to sort of say, hey, it isn't as fearful as it seems to be. So you can bring in new knowledge, or you can, again, address yourself to a teacher or something like that, right? But it starts with sort of recognizing that there is resistance going on, opening up that resistance. How do you feel? What are you thinking? Trying to express it, as deeply and as richly as you can, to really feel like, yes, this is what I was feeling. That sense, should be achieved where you feel like, yes, I've expressed really why it is, I was feeling so reluctant, I felt it was really important that, I, was dealing with my boss in a certain way, or I felt it was really important that, this family situation had to be dealt with in a particular way. And so it felt very hard to do surrender or self-inquiry at that moment, whatever it is. And then, if you find that there are recurrent resistant situations where you aren't able to overcome them, that might suggest that there is something deeper, and really there is something deeper in all of us, one way or the other, whether you choose to take this next suggestion or not. But if you do find that there is a recurring resistance that you can't seem to get over and you can't fully understand, especially that, if you can't fully understand it, then I might recommend something like psychoanalysis, which is, of course, I should always emphasize, it's not just any therapy, it's a particular kind of therapy, psychoanalysis, or it's sort of slightly less intense sibling, psychoanalytic psychotherapy. So you can find a psychoanalytic institute near wherever you are, or find a psychoanalyst in your area. And there are a lot of psychoanalysts, I think, who are doing even Zoom now. It's a long process. So if you go that route, then you're really going to look deep inside, and you're going to unpack a lot of your unconscious and past assumptions about how to operate in the world. It's not a fast process, it's not a magic cure-all, but it might be, nevertheless, the only and the best way to give yourself a degree of freedom from some of these recurring patterns. So this is important. So to know, right, that the search is primarily about this overcoming of resistances. The resistances are coming from conditioning. In the traditional Hindu sense, you might say, the vasanas, which are the mental tendencies, are resisting. They are the resistance. Thoughts are the resistance in some sense. Your old way of looking at things is the resistance. Your old way of seeing yourself as the mind and the body gives rise to desires and fears, gives rise to your sense you need to address those desires and fears and keep the mind and body in this continuous cycle. We're trying to interrupt that hamster wheel. Problem is, from the perspective of the hamster wheel, that's not so great, because your time spent interrupting the hamster wheel is time not spent cycling on it, from its perspective. So to recognize that's what's going on, to try to express the emotions and thoughts connected to it, to try to address them where possible, to be patient with yourself, and if necessary, and it's nothing wrong with it, I've done it many years myself, to go into psychoanalysis or psychoanalytic psychotherapy, and really get to the root of things, clarify what it is you want. I should also finally add, right, it's okay to be conflicted about spirituality. It's okay to pursue it to the extent you're capable of it. You may not want to pursue it 100% right now, and that's fine. That's just where you are. So you pursue it to the extent that you can, and you open up these resistances in the process, But there's no way to force yourself, and no need to force yourself, no possibility even of forcing yourself to go faster or more intensely than you want to go. There's only the possibility of being more and more honest about what it is you feel and what it is you want. That very process of being honest, of listening to all the voices within yourself and all their desires, that's what's going to get you to clarity faster.